In terms of a long-term project, we're about to emerge. I mean, here in the next 8 months, we'll emerge out of this pandemic. Hopefully, the vaccines will be circulated. We're going to have a Biden administration in the U.S., so we're going to move into a post-Trump world. So what emergent forms of political thinking, pedagogy, organization are necessary as we move into this sort of next historical period? And I think, Henry, let me just ask an attendant question so I don't have to go back and ask it a second time. There's that question, and also, people, social theorists, have been talking for several years now about that we're in an interregnum, that neoliberalism is sort of evolving and mutating and changing. Some people might claim we're entering into a post-neoliberal period. So on one hand, what kinds of new forms of political thinking, pedagogy, and organization we need for a post-Trump, post-pandemic period that we're moving into? And I'd also like to get your questions on neoliberalism and the interregnum and how maybe these two things come together.
I think that this is a very dangerous time. I think that the elements of a unapologetic, updated fascism have ascertained themselves in a way that we thought was impossible in many liberal democracies throughout the world. I think that the great fear that I have is that people will think that with the election of Biden, the era of Trump is over, and that they'll personalize Trump in ways to suggest that he was just silly and stupid, but somehow was able to accumulate a certain degree of power. I mean, what Trumpism is about is a cancer in a democratic society that has a long life. And it's been going on since 1619, at least in the United States. And we need to figure out how that gets reproduced, what it means, what shape it's going to take in the future, and particularly more than anything else, how this puts into relief, high relief, the importance of education and changing consciousness. Because if this movement is matched by an overwhelming cascade of manufactured ignorance and depoliticizing forces, Trumpism is not going to disappear by any stretch of the imagination. It'll intensify, and the United States will become a full-fledged fascist country within 4 years. At the end of Biden's term, Trump, they'll be back and they'll win. So that's very scary, to say the least. And I'm trying to think through that now in a piece I'm trying to write. I'm having some trouble. But what I'm trying to argue is that this Trumpism is a cultural politics that has a long history. And we need to unravel it. And we need to unravel it by making education central to politics. Around the question of neoliberalism, I am just baffled by people who make the claim that we're in a post-neoliberal period. I don't see any indication that the people whose power has been consolidated in the interest of their financial interests and class consolidation, I don't see them going away at all. And anybody who thinks they are is absolutely insane. They don't go away, they just remutate. I mean, they're smart. They understand how ideas work, they understand how ideologies work, and they just update themselves. So it seems to me that when we talk about neoliberalism, first and foremost, we're not just talking about the pedagogical side of neoliberalism, which very few people talk about. You do, I do, but very few people talk about it. That has to be accentuated, whether it's the elevation of self-interest, privatization, commodification, deregulation, all those things, the emphasis on moral individual responsibility. But I think that the other side of this is that we need to be enormously concerned about how this notion of neoliberalism in its mutations, what forms it takes and how that can be made visible. And it can't happen unless we focus as a central concept on economic inequality. Economic inequality is the bedrock of neoliberalism. It's the bedrock. It destroys lives. It accumulates power in ruthless ways. It creates a culture of cruelty. And as it mutates, it no longer makes the claim that it's going to provide social mobility, all the benefits of meritocracy. It's done with that stuff. It's failed, and it knows it's failed. So it's suffering a legitimation crisis. And as a result of that legitimation crisis, it has retooled itself to now claim and align itself with fascist ideologies, particularly the notion of the logic of disposability, the question of racial purity, the question of blaming immigrants. So all of a sudden, it's now created a new aesthetic, a new discourse, a new set of enemies, and it worked. And it worked. Let's be honest, it worked. 75 million people voted for Trump. That suggests to me it worked. Now, whether we can fight that is really the question of the 21st century.